Welcome to Star Kittens Media, where we discuss 13 sign astrology. Today we are talking about the new moon, which occurs on June 7 at 12:37 a.m. here in New Zealand. For our friends and followers in the United States, that equates to 8:37 a.m. on June 6 Eastern Daylight Time. We are going to highlight the Sun-Moon conjunction with Venus in Taurus. And on one side, they make a square with Saturn in Aquarius, but on the other side, they make a square with the asteroid Juno in Leo. Lots to talk about. Enjoy. Welcome to Star Kittens Media, and today we are discussing the new moon occurring in June, which we are right now, and of course myself, Sana, and David. Kia ora.
Kia ora, hello.
I'm quite excited about this one because we are talking about a planetary body that's dear to my heart, Juno. But let's just have an overview of what we will be discussing today.
Yeah, hello all. So of course, any new moon is where the moon and the sun come together. So the overall themes are to do with integration, the union of opposite energies, the masculine and feminine polarities merge, if you will, and the conjunction with Venus at this new moon brings good vibes. So enjoy. Of course, Taurus is an earth sign, so this is a physical, sensuous experience for us. And it is all about our connection with Mother Gaia, family and friends. However, as much as that beautiful, benevolent energy exists at the new moon, there's also some other things going on, and there's a T-square involving Saturn and the asteroid Juno that you touched on before, and we'll go into that in more depth. Suffice to say at the moment that the square to Saturn broadly is about learning lessons or mastering lessons around resources, how we consume resources, i.e. Taurus is about resources, and the competition that's going on the planet right now to bring us everything that we experience, whether it's food, whether it's technology, whether it's streaming services, cars, whatever it is. There's a whole process behind that. So Saturn square is going to reflect or have us reflect on that. And of course, with Saturn and Aquarius, we're talking about imaginative responses to such a deep existential question as to where do these resources come from in our relationship with Mother Earth or Taurus. And then the square to Juno brings forward our ideas about and concepts about soulmates, twin flames, and serious committed relationships, where Venus in traditional astrology is associated with love and flirtation. Juno is actually the archetype of deep and meaningful relationships. So looking forward to talking about Juno, as you said right from the outset.
Yes. And so just let's start from the beginning. When the zodiac cycle begins, the sun is in Aries, and now the sun is in Taurus. So Aries is a fire sign. It's the governed or guarded by Mars. It's the explosion, the first spark, whereas Taurus, represented by the bull, as you said before, it is earth. Some people see it very much as a stubborn traits are associated with Taurus, but for me, it's always been because it is the guardian is Venus. Venus, for me, it's that beauty that you see. People that have a strong Taurus energy tend to live in beautiful houses. They just have an eye for keeping that beauty all around them. How do you see Taurus at this time?
Yeah, I guess what I'd say first off there is that all signs have their positive and I guess shadow manifestations. And when we look at the spirit animal for Taurus, certainly the bull can represent stubbornness and a really determined nature, but it can also symbolically represents fertility and power and a number of other positive attributes. With those things in mind, as you mentioned, the guardian of Taurus is Venus, and that is amplifying this this new moon, the energies and the messages of this new moon. But really, the brass tacks of it is that Taurus is to do with our five senses. So we're talking about what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we touch, and what we smell. So the focus in a Taurus new moon is physical pleasure and gratification. It's a time to slow down, perhaps do a taste test, make a meal, sit in a hot tub, walk in nature, marvel at a sunset, swim in a river, feed the birds, snuggle up to a loved one, sprawl in front of a fire, smell a rose, diffuse some essential oils, pat a cat, go on a date. I think you get the idea. So this is a time of rest and recreation, of relaxation, of pampering and enjoyment. It's a time to wind down and to have an attitude of gratitude, to count your material blessings, big and small.
Thank you for that last point. I think we tend to just get stuck in, oh, I don't have this and I'll be happy when. And by practicing those attitude of gratitudes, it's a beautiful way to start the day, but also to finish the day and just go through in your mind of, I'm so grateful to have a warm shower. We ran out of gas yesterday, and it's those moments that you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful to have warm water, but a roof over my head, living with loved ones, those things that you might take for granted. But I think if you just have a moment of, I don't have what I want, think about the things that you already have in your life and find the gratitude in that. So Saturn, a little while ago, we spoke about when Saturn first moved into Aquarius, and he is still there. And the current configuration, it makes a square with this new moon. So we have the Sun, Moon in Taurus, and then Saturn make a square with Saturn in Aquarius. Please, what's your take?
Yeah, Saturn typically symbolizes lessons, mastery, teaching. And when in Aquarius, as we've talked about in other blogs, it's really about the energy of breakdowns and breakthroughs. So the breakdown of the Saturnian systems and the age of Aquarius coming together, Saturn and Aquarius coming together. And the last time we talked, of course, about and did quite a lengthy blog on Saturn and Aquarius in the 60s. I think it was between 64 and 67 or 64, 66, somewhere in that period. When you look historically on this planet, there was a lot that went on in terms of the interaction of the Saturnian and Aquarian energies. So, the age of Aquarius is really disruptive to the status quo. It's about upending the Saturnian power structures of politics, of markets, of education, of healthcare, of big business, big oil, big tech, big pharma, big banking. And the energy here in the context of Taurus is really about understanding that as much as we're enjoying, as we talked about before, the material pleasures that come from being on this planet, and big and small, whatever they are, and celebrating that and recognizing that Mother Gaia is actually providing that for us, and that these resources have been harvested and harnessed through these big Saturnian systems. So the square relationship is about understanding and being willing to confront and ask those questions, those deep questions. So this is quite a grunty energy coming to the fourth. On the one side, we've got kind of a relax and rest and enjoy, but over here with Saturn in the square, we're talking about tackling some big issues that are confronting humanity, inverting the pyramid of top-down control with consensus and collaboration. It's about reimagining the situations and scenarios that bring us what I call a Saturnian supply chain. So everything we enjoy in Taurus, all these resources come from a supply chain, and that supply chain ultimately goes back to Mother Earth. And so Saturn in Aquarius square Taurus is really about reimagining all of that, and where possible, reconfiguring, recalibrating, and looking at innovative solutions for the way that we manage and consume resources. And this isn't just about thinking. This is actually about getting together with people and saying, what can we do? And it might be around things like reuse, recycling, for example. So the relationship to Taurus, as we've mentioned, is clearly about resources. What goes into our material world, the extractive industries like mining, for example, and what are the consequences of that, in terms of waste and pollution? Thinking about big issues like the labor force that digs up the cobalt and the copper that drives our devices, that goes into these screens that we're using, the technologies that we have, the farmer toiling on the land, the drift net fishing, the GMOs that deliver so-called efficient consumerism. It's time to think about all of that. And what impact are we as humans having on the environment and the ecosystems around us? And there's no doubt that that's happening. And issues like globalism and trade are coming forward now, whether we like it or not. So that really is what Saturn and Aquarius square to Taurus resources is about. And there's a phenomenon also coming out, which is consistent with the Aquarian age, called the rise of the artisan, which is a global movement. It's well documented, which as trade begins to collapse in some of these relationships, people around the world think, well, why am I getting XYZ from China or from Spain or wherever you are? And it's traveling great distances via the sea and via plane and via trucks and so on, to a different way of looking at resources, which is small business, cottage industries, going back almost like back to the future. So looking at local communities to supply our needs, as opposed to, importing something via Amazon over the internet, when it can be sourced, if you like, from maybe down the road by talking to a local farmer or whatever. So these are the sorts of deep issues that Saturn in Aquarius brings forward. And when in a square with Taurus, it's very relevant for, yes, we count our blessings, but it's also time to think about, how did this all come about, and being open to those discussions.
Yeah, and what came to me as well, as you were saying that, is back in the day, you might have had one lawnmower between 3, 4, 5 households, because you're not all mowing the lawn on the same day. And for some reason, it just became really normal that, no, I have my own stuff. I have my own this and this and this and this. And so we're all got a shed full with toys and the kitchen full with apparatus that we might use once a week, once a month or whatever. And why not get to know your neighbor and share those resources, which is better for the connection you then have with your neighbor, but also much better for the Mother Earth that we live on, that we don't all need to have the super fancy toys. Just something to ponder, see if you can apply that in your life. So next up, on the other side, is Juno, and she makes a square with the new moon as well. Tell us about Juno.
Yeah, you couldn't really get two more contrasting energies of Saturn, Sirius Saturn and Juno. And this is really very different from what we've just talked about of thinking about waste and resources and management and of goods and how we interact with Mother Earth. The Juno square brings forward relationships, those serious, that one or two maybe through a lifetime, serious committed relationships. So Juno is the archetype of the mother, the queen and the goddess, and in her mythology is contained a desire to merge and to integrate. So this is a very obviously a feminine energy, and that desire to integrate the masculine energies at a new moon is very appropriate. So it's interesting that it's in a square. But we haven't talked a lot about Juno, so I'll do a little bit of a deep dive. In the Greco-Roman pantheon, she was known as the patron of marriage, and I guess in contemporary terms that means serious committed relationships. Of course, the idea of marriage is different to different people, and there's different varieties or versions of that, but it's basically Juno is about those serious committed relationships we have. And in the mythology, as the daughter of Saturn and wife of Jupiter, she was part of the ruling class. And as such, she was expected to turn a blind eye to her husband, Jupiter, who was in the mythology a philanderer with a wandering eye. And so the dutiful wife idea comes forward, which I guess is a little outdated. So Juno really raises questions about the power dynamics within relationships and the extent to which one or both partners function in that relationship out of a sense of duty or obligation to the culture, to our mother or father's expectations, to a sort of a slavish commitment to the dreams that we had as kids about what a relationship should look like. So, within relationships, or many committed relationships, there is a sense of duty and obligation. And that's really what the Juno myth brings forward, is that she had a unfaithful husband and she was expected to kind of turn a blind eye. So what does that mean, for us pondering this at this new moon? There's an expression that I like that kind of describes this, which says in Juno, you will get what you need, but you might not get what you want. So a Juno relationship is profoundly transformative, and it's likely to involve karmic cycles. It's likely to involve soul contracts and the need to resolve those or remediate them or even release them within that relationship. And these are relationships where the other person acts as a mirror to our disowned self. And so we can be triggered in these relationships. And often that triggering of can lead to blaming and shaming and gaslighting, because we would rather shift our responsibility for self-empowerment and for resolving some of these soul contracts or karmic issues, would rather shift the emphasis onto the other than look inward. And that happens a lot within relationships, of course. Juno relationships can be where we are stuck in self-defeating patterns and where we feel restricted and suppressed. So, of course, Juno turning a blind eye because she was part of this kind of elite ruling class, that's very much been stuck and suppressed. But the magic in Juno is in the communication that can happen within the context of these committed, serious relationships. And they can be a really safe place where we deeply acknowledge the other. But the key lesson of those sorts of difficult dynamics of confronting them is that we need to define our own moral compass. I mean, often we come into relationships with an idea of the way that the roles of the male and the female, or the husband or the wife or whoever, is supposed to be. but it's about having a look at that and saying, well, is that appropriate, and is that actually for our best development? And that those are difficult issues. So Juno brings forward concepts about sovereignty versus disempowerment within serious relationships, and also the characteristics and attributes that will bring out the best and the worst in us. And Juno is the classic Greek tragedy, where the other partner or the other individual is the protagonist, and eventually, through a process of breaking down and then, coming to some self-awareness and discovery, we emerge stronger, wiser, and smarter. And as a consequence, we evolve our consciousness within a Juno relationship. So there's a lot of aspects and dynamics going on with Juno. But for many listening, these will be quite topical issues, both now at this new moon and at other times too.
How did you become interested in these asteroids? Venus, everyone will know Venus, more the love and the beauty aspects of those kind of relationships, but Juno just takes things to another level when it comes to those. So how did you find out and then really got interested in applying it into your own life and into the charts that you see?
I guess a couple of things came to mind or come to mind in thinking about that. Is that firstly, and I've mentioned this before, but for those who are unaware, I've been studying diligently astrology since I was about maybe 10 or 11 years of age. And, I'm now mid-50s, so that's 40 plus years. And I began my journey into astrology not the way that you would today. In other words, there was no internet to reference. There was no computer-generated charts. We used an ephemeris, which is a book that has the placements of all the planets at different days, way out to the future. So you had to, I had to learn how to really develop an understanding of astrology from the ground up, using picks and shovels, if you like, as opposed to, what might be considered modern day tools. And because of that, I went really deep into understanding the archetypes, and it always made sense to me that when I began to learn that there were these asteroids such as Juno, and we talked about Sedna and Icarus, Ceres is another, and even the fixed stars like Sirius, Arcturus. There's so many of these higher frequency energies that exist within the chart, and to me, Venus had a very specific role, and I came to learn that it wasn't necessarily describing for me anyway as an archetype. Venus didn't describe for me what a serious relationship looked like, whereas Juno did. And, in all the mythology about Venus, yes, they say, there's that book that a lot of people have heard of. It's a classic, which is Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. And it's supposedly about the differences in the sexes and this sort of thing. But Venus has had a role, certainly in the love lexicon, but didn't really describe for me what a long-term committed relationship looked like, which isn't to say that Venus can't play a role in that. But for me, Venus was more about the attraction and that initial spark, and the fun and the flirtatious and the honeymoon period, whereas the Juno is more about, all right, you found your soulmate, your twin flame, this person you want to be with, they want to be with you, and you're going to spend maybe a lifetime together, or many, many years, maybe decades together. And within that context, there is a lot that goes on, and there's profound growth that can take place. And Venus didn't really describe that. So, as you and I have talked about, my Juno is in Cancer, and, I consider you to be my Juno because you bring to me, when you think about the qualities of Cancer from a masculine perspective, it's that mother instinct and your mum to, kids. And I, that was an energy that was obviously very important for me, even though I didn't want to personally have kids, but I love being around them. And, you know, there's just a whole lot that I find by looking at the placement of Juno, for example, in terms of maybe illustrating or giving some insight into what I look for in a partner. And you've got a lot of those Cancer qualities. As a mother, there's a home, you're very much emphasis on home and family. And those are qualities that resonate very strongly. And I think when people are looking at chart casting, if you want to understand the kind of the flirtatious, what might catch your eye, that's Venus. But if you want to understand, depending on what age you are, or depending on how many relationships you've been in, or whether you're in one or not in one, even if you haven't been in one and you're going to go into one, the placement of Juno can provide a great deal about, as I said before, not necessarily what we want on the surface, but certainly what we need. And Juno absolutely, in my experience, brings forward those soul contracts and those karmic loops, which is why often people find themselves in they come into a relationship and think, I feel like deja vu, I feel like I've been here before. And you and I have certainly got that. So, yeah, long answer, but, I just thought I'd provide, how did I get there? Or you asked how I got there. Well, that's how I got there.
Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of how you've shown me astrology to be, that there are higher vibrations of certain archetypes, and it's so enriching to dive into those different aspects. If you've never had a chart done, then for sure start with the usual suspects of the sun, moon, rising sign, Saturn, and all those. But if you want to explore more of what the divine design for this lifetime really entails with those different archetypes, then definitely reach out to us, because it's just an enriching experience to get to know those other frequencies. Thank you for the long answer. I think that brings us to our final thoughts. So we've touched on Taurus, and Taurus being ruled by, or the guardian of Taurus is Venus. Saturn is in Aquarius right now, and Juno sits opposite, and she sits in a Leo. So what are your final thoughts on this new moon?
Well, we started with the idea that a new moon is integrating. It's an integrative energy. Of course, the sun and the moon are right next door to each other, and they become one. And that is reflected perfectly in the Juno archetype. What I would just jump out and say, which I didn't touch on before, of course, with Juno and Leo, that is really a call to the divine feminine, who are maybe stuck in that type of duty and obligation relationship, to stand up and express yourself. Because there is, of all the fire signs, of course, Leo is the most celebrated and the most kind of overt and obvious. I mean, it's the lioness, time to roar. So, if we think again, I could have touched on this before, but that Juno archetype in Leo is very much about emerging from the shadow of those difficult relationships. So if you are in, and it doesn't necessarily, these myths and legends don't necessarily need to be just because that's relating to a goddess or the divine feminine. It can also equally apply as a template or a theme for males too. So yeah, in summarizing that or adding to what I touched on with Juno, yeah, the Leo archetype is absolutely about self-confidence within a relationship and making sure that those power imbalances are dealt with. We've touched on, of course, Venus is love, Juno is transformation within a serious committed relationship. And that's where we come to a profound self-awareness through integration and through interaction, where these soul contracts and karmic loops that are playing out can be remediated and even released in some cases. So it's time to deal with those. It's also a little bit of a mind Jedi trick here where, on the one side, we're enjoying, as we said, walk in nature, go listen to the birds. You like to walk on the beach with no shoes, get your feet in the sand sort of thing. All of that, sit in a hot tub. Something that is a very reflective exercise for Taurus. And I did this in a business context one time, and it was really amazing. And maybe you could do something like this. Is I took a piece of chocolate, a Ferrero Rocher, and I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with those, but they're a beautiful light chocolate that they've got coconut on the outside. And this facilitator of this course, it was all about being present. And this facilitator said, put that piece of chocolate in your mouth, and instead of eating it at the normal speed that you would, just hold it there and savor it. And just slowly experience all of the flavors and just let it dance in your mouth. And that's sort of the Taurus energy. So we've got that. But at the same time, we've been asked to enjoy that materialism and the physical experiences. We're also being asked to reflect through the Saturn square about the supply chain and to reflect on the circular economy, to reflect on our relationship with Gaia and her abundance, to ask ourselves, are we being good stewards? Are we being conscious consumers? Are we aware of the impacts that we are having as humans on the environment and the world's fragile ecosystems? These are good questions. These are Aquarian, Saturnian questions. So Saturn asks us to ponder, to reflect, and to do something practical about it. It's not just about thinking about it or imagining it or mind mapping it. It's actually about doing something practical, because Saturn is all about action.
Beautiful. Yes, action. Good way to start the new moon cycle. Set your intention and act on those. I've mentioned it before, a gratitude ceremony every morning and at night, if that's something that you think will benefit you. And also the physical is the yoga, or if yoga or stretching is not for you, it could be qigong, it could be walking, it could be cycling, being in your body whilst the energy is still very much influenced by Taurus. Thank you for that beautiful explanation of everything. If you are interested in getting your own natal chart done, you can do so. The link is below in the description. We also do 2-hour long natal readings, which will be recorded, and you will keep the recording. You can support us by buying us a coffee. You can listen to us on Spotify and join us on Facebook, Instagram, and Telegram. So thank you so much, David. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And we shall see you next time.
Bye-bye.